Good morning, everyone. Hear me okay? Cool. Hope you're enjoying Ignite so far. Thanks for coming to this session. I know you had a bunch of options every day, and thanks for picking this one over others. My name is Subodh Bhargav. I'm a program manager in Windows Server team. And I'm going to be talking about a program we announced last year working with our hardware partners. So yeah, let's get right to it. So Windows Server 2016 is the most cloud-ready server we have ever built. It has big improvements in security, in software-defined data center, and an application platform for developers to build modern apps, either in cloud or on premises. It had things like layers of protection when it comes to security, things like shielded VMs to protect virtual machines from malicious admins or from compromised hosts. It has things like credential guard to protect your credentials. It has things like just-in-time administration, just enough administration to control the scope of administrative privileges you are giving to an admin and the time it remains in scope. It has a bunch of features like host guardian service, et cetera, right? In the software-defined data center realm of things, we added a bunch of capabilities all around compute, software-defined storage, software-defined networking. On the compute side, and I mean, these are just some quick highlights I'm sort of outlining here. On the compute side, we added automated updates, automated patch and updates of the server, right? So you can non-disruptively upgrade your host fabric, going from a previous version of Windows OS to Windows Server 2016 without causing any downtime to VMs. On the network side, we added a bunch of network function virtualization, which is a fancy term for saying that things that used to be done in physical appliances before, load balancing, firewall, edge gateways, what have you, right? They're now all virtualized, running in software inside VMs. So now you can easily scale and easily choose where to deploy and how to deploy your workloads. Gives you more agility, more security. On the storage side, there were huge improvements in terms of shared nothing architecture we introduced with Storage Spaces Direct, which I'm sure you've heard about. And it gives you enterprise-class storage at a much lower cost point than what you see with traditional SAN and NASes. Things like storage replica, for example, right, gives you a seamless way to replicate at block level storage from A to B for DR purposes, for business continuity, for example. So yeah, so there's a bunch of features, and just to highlight a couple of sessions where we are going to do a deeper dive on some of these capabilities, as well as what's coming in new. So I definitely encourage you to go attend those. So just to gauge the room here, quick show of hands. How many here have deployed Server 2016 at the host level and using it for SDDC capabilities, or at least Hyper-V in general? Very nice. I see almost 50% of the hands go up. Yeah, so that's great. And it has been just a year, right? It was released last year, and yeah, it's not bad from a Windows Server standpoint, right? Customers are typically hesitant to move from, move on to the latest version, but 50% is actually great, and we have a lot of market to still capture. So this is all great, right? While this is all great, there's a bunch of capabilities. Let's face it, right? It's still just a promise when it comes to talking about these cool capabilities and feature. And I say that because there's a difference between promise and reality, right? It doesn't become a reality until you guys, customers, deploy it and start to see benefits that it's promised to deliver, right? Start to see those cloud efficiencies in your data centers, on your premises, in your clouds. And to fill that gap between promise and reality, we knew there was a bunch of challenges. And that's where Windows Server Software Defined comes in. It's a program that we announced last year, and just at a high level, what it does is it takes all the goodness of Windows Server 2016, all the software-defined capabilities that I just quickly mentioned before, and a bunch of others, and then we work with hardware partners. These are all the top server OEMs in the market today. And we develop pre-packaged offerings that give you pre-validated hardware. So it all starts with a reference design, a reference architecture where we outline all the best practices, configuration guidelines in order to, to specify how to build these systems. Then comes a phase where solution vendor goes through a very rigorous certification and validation process. And then there's a seamless deployment, the day zero deployment as we call it, on your site, at customer site. So we are not leaving you stranded just by providing you a system, but there's also deployment to go with that if you choose to use that service. And then finally, for operations, we have a recommendation and we have prescriptive guidance in terms of how you can operate and manage the stack, as we call it, day 100 operations, right? Steady state operations using System Center. So this at a high level is a program, and again, the goal was to really fill that, connect the promise to reality, right? So we understand there's a lot of challenges in seeing all these cool features and trying to adopt that for your cloud versus actually, finding the right hardware, deploying it, meeting all the compatibility requirements, and actually making it up and running, and then operating it and maintaining it at day 100. So with that in mind, it's easy to see sort of what customer benefits a WSSD offering might bring to the table, right? So as I said before, it's really all about time to value, right? You could do it yourself. I'm sure there are, like, obviously you all guys are smart customers, right? You could get your own hardware, try to build it at a lower cost maybe, right? Spend a lot of time designing and building out that deployment model for Windows Server SDDC. And not to say that it's very difficult, which actually it is. To some customers, not so much to others. But it's really that time to value, right? And we understand a lot of customers, especially in the enterprise segment, robo, small, medium customers, even service providers for that matter, right? Because we see a gamut of customers who actually benefit from this. Really value that time to value thing, right? So how quickly you can get it up and running and how quickly you can start reaping the benefits. So pre-validation obviously gives you that level of comfort, right? It gives you peace of mind that all the hardware is fully compatible. It meets all the SDDC Windows Server requirements. So you can have that confidence bringing in these hardware components and hardware systems into your environment. Time to value in terms of, it is pre-optimized, for example, right? So you don't have to fiddle with all the knobs and levers, different configuration settings buried here or there, right, in the OS. And trust me, there's a lot, right, including things that are also hidden by PowerShells in some cases, for example. So what we do as part of the reference architecture and as part of working with hardware partners is really to expose all those settings, make it more explicit, and to make sure that all the guidelines are followed, right? All the best practices are followed. So it gives you a pre-optimized stack out the gate. And then I mentioned deployment, right? That's a huge benefit because it's fully automated. It goes from bare metal all the way to setting up the cluster, bringing up storage spaces direct, even bringing in System Center if needed, right? So you can start adding your VMs and adding your workloads right onto it. And then finally, there's a hardware choice, right? So as you'll see later in the presentation, there's a bunch of partners we work with. I'm sure you can find a preferred partner that you have today. And also, not just partners, but a bunch of offerings, different kinds of offerings, and we'll see that later. So let's talk about deployment options that are available in the stack today. It's important to understand it conceptually before we move on. So first is converged storage. Think of this as storage only or scale-out file server. So what you see here on this lower half portion of the diagram here, that is what the offering is all about, right? So it's storage only. It's a scale-out file server built using storage spaces direct. And this has been the traditional model. It's still very popular, and it has very compelling use cases, which I'll talk about later. But this is where you connect your Hyper-V node machines or your workloads over SMB3, and it talks to a scale-out file server, which is, again, built using storage spaces direct, software-defined storage. So it's very easy to scale these two layers independently, and that's why service providers and some of the very large enterprises who want finer-grained control over how much capacity they want to put in the compute layer for workloads for Hyper-V versus how much capacity they want to just put for storage, they can have that fine-grained control. On the other hand, if you collapse these two, compute and storage, let me just play that again for folks who missed it. So you remove that connectivity layer and you build everything on a single node, and that's hyper-converged. I'm sure you have heard of it. It's sort of a buzz thing for the last few years. And it has its own benefits, right? It's very easy to scale in lockstep. It's very easy to scale out. You just bring in these building blocks, if you will, right, that include compute, network, and storage, and you add it, and you keep extending your cluster that way. It's very appealing for its own reasons. You can have a VM-centric management. You can have a very workload-driven sort of management view of things. You can scale it out very easily. So it's very appealing to not only enterprises, but even to small and medium customers who like that ease of use and who don't typically have these traditional silos of compute, network, and storage admins, right, in their shops. And there's just single admin. They have a VM-centric view, and they can scale it out very easily, as well as deploy it very easily. So again, both have its pros and cons, and it appeals to different segments of market. So let's look at what's actually included in the stack, right? How the Windows Server 2016 SDDC stack built up. So I just talked about hyper-converged versus converged SDS or storage only, right? So those are the two main sort of categories of offerings. Under hyper-converged, we have two flavors, standard and premium. So all of this is based on industry standard x86 servers, right? So there's no getting past that. It's just that. That's the hardware layer. It's pre-validated, pre-certified through hardware partners. All of the offerings include storage spaces direct as the software-defined storage layer, because you need that, as I showed you before, either for storage-only nodes or for hyper-converged nodes. On the compute side, you have Hyper-V for doing the compute virtualization, and that's obviously required only in hyper-converged, so it doesn't show up in the converged SDS. For networking, the basic storage networking, as we call it, or Hyper-V networking, is included for all three kinds of offerings. So you have things like how do you team your network adapters, NIC teaming, how do you create vSwitches, how do you do SMP direct for that RDMA, fast RDMA networking, right? So all of those are available in all three offerings. Then comes security. We want to make it secure by default. So there's a bunch of things that we include in all three stacks. You have things like Defender, Cred Guard, Device Guard. And just to keep in mind here, I mean, these are just logical compartments that we build for our own reference architecture and for way we do deployment using Microsoft automation, right? This is not putting you in one bucket or the other. I mean, this is not hard and fast. Neither does it have any implications on licensing or pricing, right? I mean, people ask, okay, is standard priced differently from premium? I mean, hardware vendors have the prerogative as their own business to do that, right? I mean, when they go to market with these offerings. But purely from a Windows Server licensing standpoint, pricing standpoint, it's still all running on Windows Server data center. So there's no difference in cost as far as Windows Server licensing goes. These are just logical compartments we created for our own sake so that we know how much automation to do in which stack, and also what hardware components can be pulled in which offering, right? So for example, premium requires certain more capabilities when it comes to network adapters, like things like VMMQ and RDMA offloads, for example, is required in premium. You also have things like, so sort of just to build this out, right? So the key difference between premium and standard are these two things. One is the SDN that I just showed up here. So you're getting network function virtualization, and that brings with it some more hardware requirements from the stack. And then the second thing is BitLocker and shielded VMs, and again, that has some requirements as well. So yeah, let me just leave it there. So this is how the stack is built. Let's move on. All right, so let's talk about some key use cases that customers have told us about that they have, that they have used Windows Server SDDC for, in the last year or so, right, so far. So we have had many success stories across the board, and I'll just outline a few, like, some sample industries and some sample workloads. But at a high level, right, if you think about converged SDS or storage only, I mean, this is one of the key use cases there, which is how can I build a lower cost, higher performing storage cluster to be a good replacement of my traditional SAN or NAS environment, right? I mean, as simple as that. So that continues to be a very appealing use case, especially when you think about large service providers, as I mentioned before, companies like Accutech and Barton Group and hosters come to mind, right? These are some of the success stories we have actually written about in customer references. The other very popular use case which we are starting to see now is these customers on the other end of the spectrum, right? So these are service providers that I said before, but these are kinds of customers who want very high performance, high throughput and low latency network between their clients and storage, right? So because Windows Server 2016 software defined and storage spaces direct, I should say, supports RDMA networking. For RDMA who don't know, for people who don't know, it gives you a way, it's a special feature in your network adapters, and it enables you to run a very high throughput, low latency networking between your two machines, basically, right? So it uses SMB direct as the protocol. And they wanted to be able to use that for their client-facing workloads, right? So these are guys who are replacing Macs with Windows 10 clients, because Windows 10 clients also supports RDMA, starting last year with enterprise version. So they are connecting that with their storage cluster and using these workloads for media streaming or create advertising, for example, right? Is a good example where they build trailers for Hollywood movies, and they have a lot of post-production media workloads that take advantage of that high-speed networking. Other examples are, Surdex Group using it for large volume data ingest. So any streaming media-oriented workloads, I mean, this is a great use case for that, and this is a great technology for that. So let me just build out this slide. So yeah, as I said before, it really cuts across industries, all these use cases, and government actually is a great example. So a large federal agency who I cannot name uses storage-only nodes in their field offices, as a for mining forensic data, for example. The other very popular use case, obviously, is hyper-converged, right? And this is very popular, as I said before, with enterprises, small to medium businesses, especially the two-node version, right? So if you think about it, I mean, it's an ideal form factor for a robo environment, remote office, branch office. And if you think about from a licensing and cost standpoint, right? If you're a Windows shop, if you're running some Windows workloads, you are having to license your Windows VM anyways, right? So think of it as you're getting your host license for free, right? Because you're having to license Windows VM, so you're running probably data center if you're running more than, I don't know, 2 or 4 VMs or something like that, right? I don't have the exact number. But if you use the same entitlement for your host, then suddenly you have built a hyper-converged fabric and you can run your VMs for free, right? Either way you look at it, it's like you're saving cost with the same Windows Server license running on host as well as guest. So that's a very popular use case, and especially with the convenience of deployment and ease of scaling, hyper-converged is a great fit there. Also, a lot of enterprises use that to host virtual desktops, to just host like line of business apps for IT infrastructure in general, to build their own internal or private clouds. SQL Server database is a very popular example. Again, most industries use that, but a couple of them that come to mind are nonprofits like King County Library and Youth Villages, actually. Yeah, we did a case study recently on those guys. They use SQL Server database. One uses them in a storage-only node, so they're using it disaggregated or converged SDS, as I called it before. So they're connecting SQL Server over SMB3 to a storage spaces direct storage-only node. And the other one is using hyper-converged, so running SQL Server locally on CSVs in the hyper-converged deployment. And finally, there are people who like to use storage spaces direct and SDDC in general to build very dense, very cheap storage for storing their backups and archive data. And this is very popular as well, right? So, I mean, if you look closely here, I mean, there's a spectrum of use cases, and it speaks to the benefit of the stack, right? I mean, it's the beauty of the stack that it lends itself so well to so many different use cases, all the way from a very capacity optimized use case, which is backup archive, to a very performance, low latency driven use case, media streaming or high IOPS SQL workload, for example, right? And everything in between, right? Creating a private cloud hosting infrastructure VMs. All right, so with that, let's look at real quick some of the pillars that I spoke about before in terms of design, validation, deployment, and operations. So what the programs bring to the table. So the first one is design, right? So as I said before, we build a reference architecture, and I won't go through all the details here. It's a large build-out slide. But just to give you an appreciation for what goes on behind the scenes, for all these 4 phases, actually, I should say that, because you as customers, right, I mean, you don't need to worry about how this was done, how the sausage was made, if you will, right? And the whole idea being that, we do the heavy lifting, working with our hardware partners to give you something that is really turnkey, right? So you give your requirements to the hardware vendor in terms of workloads, IOPS, throughput, what have you, right, capacity. And they build a system that is configured to your needs, but which is pre-validated and meets all our design guidelines and principles, right? So you don't have to really worry about all these details, but still it's meant to give you an appreciation for what goes on behind the scenes, how much work both Microsoft and hardware partners together, and how much we have vested in this, and how much work we do behind the scenes, right? So, just to give you some quick highlights, we go through all the design overview, hardware requirements, as I said before. What are the requirements for each component, right, at the server level? How much CPU is good for a performance optimized system versus capacity optimized, for example? How much memory do you need as a ratio of your cache tier, right? So there are different tiers of storage you're probably going to have in your storage node, or in your storage spaces direct node, I should say. What kind of boot devices are supported, security features, server and cluster configuration, what are the good BIOS settings, hyper-threading or not, cluster quorum, how to build that, cluster networking in general, right? That's a big area of description in the reference architecture. Network configuration, your NIC teaming, set, vSwitch, all that good stuff, RDMA networking, how to do that, performance optimizations using all the virtualization technologies we have. Then comes the storage configuration, right? How to design pools, whether a single pool, multiple pool, single volume, multiple volumes, what kind of volumes, whether it's parity volume or a mirror or a mirror parity or a multi-resilient volume, right? So there's different options, file systems, ReFS or NTFS. I mean, again, all the best practices are laid out in the reference architecture. Storage quals, how to do that. Security configuration, again, how to configure all the things, system center, and then what are the design limits, right? So again, I didn't mean to cover all of these in detail, but just to sort of net it out, right? What it really means is us working with the hardware partner, with the solution partner, I should say, and really starting with looking at what workloads and what market segment they want to go after, whether it's transactional oriented like databases, IOPS oriented, or a mixed IO workload or a sequential workload, then finding the right type of offering that would meet that need, whether it's hyper-converged or converged SDS. Then doing the BOM selection for each and every component, the key ones being the storage, HPA, NICs, and the server itself, and what kind of CPU memory, how do you size it, right? What are the configuration best practices around all these different topics, and then how do you measure performance, and how do you scale and size the system, right, using different tools that we have in place. And again, some of the sessions that we have in Ignite this year that go through a lot of details around each one of these topics. So I definitely recommend going to those sessions. For the validation is really key to the program, right? This is where actually the program began. When we started this small, validation was the first thing that came to mind in terms of how can we help customers find the right compatible hardware that meets all the SDDC guarantees that the stack is imposing on the hardware, right? So let me just sort of draw a picture here, which is how do we get to this end goal of creating WSSD offerings, right? What does that entail? So that's the end goal. You get WSSD offering, which is fully certified and validated. But how do you get to that, right? So it all starts with components and system certification. What I mean by that is think of these 4 key areas or 4 key components: your host bus adapter, HPAs, your network adapters, right? Your storage media, NVMe drives, SSDs, or hard drives, and your server chassis itself, right? Server itself. So those are the 4 key areas. So we pull in our IHV community, the independent hardware vendors, right? The drive vendors, the HPA vendors, NIC vendors, and the server vendors to come together and do the basic logo certification for Windows Server 2016. This logo certification has been around forever. That's nothing new. That's just the base compatibility check that the software meets hardware requirements that Windows Server imposes. what we do as additional as part of this program is we lay over on top something called SDDC AQs, additional qualifications. So think of these as requirements that the SDDC stack specifically brings to the table, and it requires the hardware to meet. So that's your, those are your SDDC qualifications. And then you put all the components and parts together. You build a single node first, obviously, right? And then you put multiple of these nodes and you do a minimum to a maximum scale testing. And what that entails is, if as a vendor, if as a solution partner, you are going to market with a 2-node to a 16-node offering, right? You better test it at 2-node. That's the minimum scale, and you test it at 16-node. I mean, that's the ask of these partners. And not only just test it functionally, but we want to make sure that it performs reliably, and it performs reliably at scale, right? That's the whole idea. So that's why you see stress and reliability here, really stressed. And just to give you some more insights into how we test that stress and reliability, we bring in something called PCS, Private Cloud Simulator. This is the culmination of a lot of learning that Microsoft has as a company in bringing private cloud appliances, CPS going back to like 3 or 4 years, cloud platform system, CPS, right? So that was pretty popular with very large enterprises, and the learnings we gathered from those enterprise-grade systems over the years, and we have continued to evolve the tool, is what the PCS brings to the table, right? So just going through it quickly, I mean, it all starts with defining SLAs, the service level agreements. It's really a test harness, right? So what it does is it injects faults, it injects different kind of scenarios, it moves VMs around, it pauses VMs, it does backups of VMs. We introduce failure scenarios like, tripping on a power cord, losing a drive, for example, losing cluster quorum, you name it. I mean, there's a hundreds of things that we test as part of this test suite, and we ask partners to run it in a 4-day test period. It's a 4-day soak cycle. So it's a very rigorous test, and VM creation, bootstrap, I mean, it lists a bunch of things here. And the whole idea is to maintain that availability and throughput goal at the VM level, right? So no matter what happens at the fabric layer, the hardware can fail, the node can get, the cable can get unplugged or what have you, right? VM could be moving around. We want to make sure that it's fully load balanced, it performs optimally, and there's no downtime to those VMs, to the workloads running in VMs, right? So then we accelerate all this testing, a year's worth of data center activities compressed in a 96-hour window, as I said before, 4-day run period. And then we measure what the SLA was in the end, and if it's above 95%, you get a pass, and that's how these systems are actually validated in our labs and in partners' labs. Cool. Deployment, talking about briefly there, so there's 2 options here. One is a partner-provided deployment, so partner owns and provides, partner always provides deployment, right, period, that's a given, but there's 2 flavors to it. Either it's a partner-owned methodology, so, a lot of these partners have a lot of experience over years working with their customers, right, so they have their own methodology to bring in systems on-site, in your shops and actually deploying it, right? So we are not taking that away from them. We are just building on top of that, right? So we want partners to continue to be able to do that, and we would like them to offer that as a service, right? So to meet the goal of complete day 0 deployment, fully automated day 0 deployment, right? So that's one option. The second option is, again, for partners to consume what we have built from Microsoft. We have built a complete automation tooling, if you will, using PowerShell DSC and other technologies that we have, a whole deployment engine that does a full deployment, end-to-end deployment, from scratch, right? From bare metal all the way, building all the layers, as I said before. And it literally takes like a couple of hours to build a 4-node hyper-converged config, right? A couple of hours for a 4-node. So it's huge, in terms of time savings and also in terms of, removing that error rate, because it's fully automated. We're not having, or asking you to go in and muck with any settings. At least the stack will be up and running, and then obviously you can go in and optimize it to your heart's content, but at least you have that quick time to value. So I'm looking at the clock here. Let me go a little bit faster because I do want to give my guest speakers, customers, some time to talk about their use cases. So at a high level, I mean, you have these three kinds of offerings: hyper-converged, standard, premium, and disaggregated, or converged SDS. And we work in both sort of scenarios. So whether you are a net new greenfield customer, you are bringing in new Active Directory AD domain, you're bringing in new system center, for example, we support that as part of deployment. We also support the scenario where you are a brownfield or an existing customer and you just want to integrate with your existing environment, right? So both modes are supported. And as I said before, I mean, it starts with a site survey, looking at all the prereqs, looking at what kind of switches you have in place, whether it meets all the requirements or not, gather all the environmental info, and then just come in and do this whole deployment, day zero deployment, as we call it. And yeah, just get done with it in a few hours. Last but not the least, operations, right? So doing a great design is great. Also picking the right hardware is awesome, right? Doing the deployment is even great, right? But we do not want to leave customers stranded when it comes to actually maintaining the stack in a steady state environment, right? So how do you do scale out? I mean, how do you add a new node? How do you add workloads on VMs, right? How do you manage the VM lifecycle? All that good stuff, right? I mean, how do you configure different settings come day 100, right? I mean, there's nobody to help you, so what tools do you use? And that's where System Center Virtual Machine Manager and Operations Manager are our recommended tools of choice. And if you go attend one of their sessions, and even in last Ignite they spoke about it, they have added a ton of capabilities around maintaining, managing, and operating Windows Server 2016 SDDC stack, right? The entire VM lifecycle management, doing compute settings, storage, setting up the storage spaces direct cluster, adding a new node, for example, creating volumes, doing storage quals and networking. They have added capabilities around configuring your software-defined networking for you, load balancers, firewall, you name it, right, as well as security. And obviously, you want to use SCOM or the operations manager to monitor and get feedback from how the stack is performing, IOPS, throughput, latency, downtime, what have you, right? So those are the go-to tools for operations, right? So with that completes sort of what the program entails at a high level, what the motivation was, and what are the use cases, et cetera, right? So let me pause briefly here for questions, if there are any. Otherwise, we can always take them in the end as well. Sure. Yeah, if you could please approach the mic.
If you please clarify the premium and standard under the data center licensing, where is that comes into play?
Yeah, so as I said, there is no implication of licensing there. It's still Windows Server 2016 data center license across the board. So even though we call it premium and standard, it just defines how much of the deployment we are doing and what the reference architecture is tied to that configuration. But in terms of Windows Server licensing itself, all three offerings require Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition because it's all running on the host, right? And you want to be able to create VMs on top.
This is only to simplify for the user. You can do simple and premium.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's just to simplify to the end user. Any other questions? Sure.
Can we download them PCS?
So PCS, it is available as a public download. There are some updates that are only behind sort of a partner portal, if you will, the Connect portal as we call it. But I don't believe the goal is to keep it behind closed doors. I mean, PCS is actually a public tool. It's just part of HLK. If you're familiar with the hardware lab kit, it's just an extension of HLK. It's actually integrated into HLK. Now that said, I mean, we don't typically recommend customers do it themselves, their own validation, because that's not the whole idea. But just to answer the question, it is available, and you can always follow up with me directly if you want to take advantage of that. Cool. So let's move on. So, all right. So this is the next section of the presentation. So talking about partners, right? Who are these partners? You can look at the slide here. I definitely encourage you to go visit their booths. I think most of them have their booths out there in the expo area. They can give you a lot of details around what their offerings are. And I have a quick slide here showing just at a high level roll-up of what these systems are that these partners support. And I mean, one thing to note here is that there are different flavors of offerings as you see here, right? So even though you see like a Dell 730 XD, for example, but they have an all-flash configuration, they have a hybrid configuration, and they have hybrid balance, as they call it, right? I mean, think of this as covering the whole spectrum from performance to a capacity-optimized system. And most of the vendors do that here in terms of how they can configure your cache and capacity drives or what kind of CPU and memory they can spec out, right? So yeah, there's a bunch of offerings to choose from. I'm sure you can find your preferred vendor on the list, and definitely encourage you to go visit their booth to sort of get more details, price points, and all that good stuff, right? Yeah, so with that said, let's get on to customer case studies. And I'm really honored to have not one, not two, but three great guest speakers here from three customers to tell us about, to tell directly us about their experience with their use cases and how they build the stack and the benefits they have seen from it, right? So starting out, I'd like to introduce Shane Yoder from TMI Systems. And let's give them a big round of applause, guys. Thanks, Shane.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Shane Yoder. I'm the Information Administrative Services Manager and part of the leadership group at TMI Systems Corporation. And Subodh just asked me to speak this morning just to kind of share my story of why I chose S2D and why I ended up choosing DataOn as my WSSD certified partner. So just real brief introduction to who's TMI Systems. We're located in Dickinson, North Dakota. We've been in business since 1969, and we're a manufacturer, and we make plastic laminate casework, architectural woodwork, and countertops, primarily for education and the healthcare market. We have about 250 employees. We only have 5 people in our IT department, including myself. Most of the group was focused on software development and support. And one of our business pillars is to be technologically current. We really feel that being on the leading edge of technology helps us manage our information better, and that provides a competitive advantage for us in our industry. So my challenge was I had an existing server cluster in iSCSI SAN, and I was looking to replace that system. It was only about 3 years old. It was a 3-node Windows 2012 R2 Hyper-V cluster, and I was connected to a 2-node iSCSI SAN array. It was a 10 gigabit network. We had about 96 10K SAS drives, and all of my server systems are virtualized, so it was running my entire environment. We have about 50 virtual machines, and we had already migrated Exchange and SharePoint and Skype out to the cloud, so we're not running those on-prem anymore. But our primary workloads internally would be file services and SQL services. We work in the construction industry, so naturally we work with a lot of architectural drawings. We're heavy users of AutoCAD and Inventor. We're a heavy user of OneNote, actually. We create a notebook for every project that we bid on, and we store all of our project-related information and then also correspondence in OneNote. We also do a lot of automation with our factory floor, so we're storing a lot of drawings and a lot of machine instructions on our network and file services. We're also really heavy on SQL Server. In our industry, there isn't a lot of software, packaged software that's available for our market, so we've ended up creating a lot of our own software to manage all of our business processes. So we're heavy in SQL. We have a lot of VB.NET applications. Our main configurator software is written in Java, and so we're a big SQL shop and VB.NET shop. And so overall, I mean, this system was working well for us, but latencies were around 8 milliseconds on average. But the system, we were kind of bottled up on it. It could only support maybe 15,000 maximum IOPS, and so we were running into some limitations there. And then also, we would see some spikes in latency. Heavy SQL I/O or heavy file service access, we would see some spikes up to 40, 50 milliseconds. During backups, we would see really large spikes and start to see the system struggle a little bit during those times. So I really wanted to kind of replace this system and not necessarily just kind of choose another iSCSI SAN and kind of rinse and repeat the same model I've been on for a few generations. So I really kind of wanted to see what was the next type of technology, kind of a more forward-looking solution. And so, I was at Ignite in Atlanta last year and learned a lot about storage spaces direct. And First time I learned kind of some of the information about it, learned that it could be a Microsoft-based solution that's hyper-converged, so I could run my Hyper-V and my storage all on the same nodes, and right away I was interested. I mean, that sounded like a great opportunity for a small, medium business like ourselves. And so I dug a little bit deeper and tried to find a little bit more information about what are some of the advantages of S2D compared to iSCSI SANs or even other hyper-converged solutions that were available that I was looking at. And just a couple of the points that really stood out to me, first of all, was the simplicity. We're a smaller business, we have a small IT staff, and so being able to run in a hyper-converged manner, all Microsoft-based solution was really appealing to us. I already knew failover cluster, I already knew Hyper-V. The only part that was really kind of new in this environment was the storage spaces features. And so I really liked the simplicity of that model. Next was fault tolerance. You know, I was used to the availability of an iSCSI SAN and the server cluster that was connected to it, so I needed to make sure that an S2D solution could also have that same type of reliability. You can run 2 nodes to 16 nodes. As far as storage efficiency, you can do parity, mirroring, a combination of them. It really seemed like it could provide a really reliable and fault-tolerant solution in any business case scenario that I could see. As far as performance goes, as I said, that was a key factor for me and kind of the driving factor for moving to S2D. And for the read-write caching, you can do storage tiering, you can do RDMA to offload the CPU off the hosts, 40 gig networking. It seemed like S2D and Data On and Microsoft really had a lot of options for me to choose from. And then finally, cost. We all have to work within budgets. And so we're certainly no exception to that. And when I compared the cost savings opportunity for my business, moving to the Data On solution that I selected compared to the iSCSI SANs I was looking at or other hyper-converged solutions that I was looking at, there was a huge price-performance gap. And so that was certainly a win-win for us. So at Ignite last year, I was looking for an S2D vendor, and also when I got back from the show, and what really came clear to me right away was there was one vendor who really understood customers like myself, who wanted to make this Microsoft choice and choose an S2D solution, and who really kind of understood how it could benefit an enterprise like ours, and that was Data On. And so earlier this year, we purchased a 4-node S2D 3216 system. I went with an all-flash system, 60 terabyte, all-flash, 3-way mirroring, and 40 gigabit RDMA NICs. So there was certainly a storage penalty going 3-way. I'm effectively only able to use a third of my storage, and then 40 gig RDMA and all flash. So there was certainly a little bit of a premium getting this type of solution. But again, the price-performance ratio of this higher spec system compared to what I was seeing from other iSCSI vendors and other hyper-converged vendors, it was still a wide margin. So I was able to get a much better performing system in this S2D solution than what I could have got from any other type of solution. In my case, working with Data On was great. They set up the entire system, tested it, configured it, validated it, provided all the scripts and configs to me, so if I chose, I could tear it all down and build it all back up and kind of learn the system. So their support was really great. I was also able to get the Mellanox switches for my core networking from them as well, and they also configured and validated all that solution. So it was really easy and turnkey for me to get it in my environment. Another great item from Data On is their MUST system, their management system. It ties directly into the storage health service of Windows Server. And it's just a simple web front end that provides you with performance metrics and system alerts to help you manage your system. It's a really simple, easy solution. And then as Subodh had mentioned, having a WSSD certified partner, someone that I know has worked with Microsoft, who's configured the system, tested it, spec'd it out specifically for S2D. That was really, really important to me and really provided me with a peace of mind that this was going to be a solution that I could get support from both Data On and Microsoft. So the first thing I did when I got the system, I tried to hammer it as much as I could with VM Fleet to see what the performance really was. This is just 100% read IO hammering away, and I could get over 2.2 million IOPS. You can see running RDMA on this system. The throughput there and the latencies are just a couple of milliseconds, so it really kind of shows the capabilities of what these type of systems can do, and I think it can meet most any customer's performance requirements. But what's really important is what does it do in your environment? How is it going to help me in my systems? And now I'm averaging about 25,000 IOPS on a daily basis. Remember before I mentioned we were kind of at 15,000 is where we were maxed out before, so not bottled up anymore for my environment. Latencies are consistently a millisecond or two, and it's really kind of removed any of that sluggishness that we may have seen during backups or heavy SQL I/O. Overall, our SQL I/O wait times have been reduced by a factor of 10. Our SQL execution queries have been reduced between 10 and 25%, and so it's really been a great performing system for us. So in conclusion, hyper-converged for a small, medium enterprise like us has really been a great solution, and having a partner like DataOn, who's WSSD certified, who was there to provide the support and provide a system like this that can really help in my business and the bottom line has been a huge help. So if anyone has any questions after the presentation, feel free to come up and be more than willing to happy to share any of my experiences. So thank you.
Thanks, Shane. I think you want to switch the mics. Next, I want to introduce Andreas from Make IT. And Andreas has been working with another great partner, Fujitsu, a very long-time partner of Microsoft. They have a strong presence both in EMEA and in APJ. So yeah, without further ado, Andreas from Make IT, and he'll talk about his use cases and his end customers. Thanks, Andreas.
So hello everyone. My name is Andreas Ternegård, and I'm working at Make It. I'm CEO. And with me here at Ignite, I have my colleague, Michael Rosén, who's sitting in the audience. He's one of the awesome guys that guys in the team responsible for the work that brought us to Orlando. So we will stick right here after the presentation if you have any questions to him. Make It is a Swedish service provider founded in the year 2000. We provide personalized and innovative IT products and services to our customers as a hoster and also on site when needed. And just to get some perspective, last year Microsoft employed 114,000 worldwide. Fujitsu, our partner, 155,000. And Make It, we are 27, which makes me even more proud of being here today. It shows that even a small company can contribute. And I'm here to tell you a little bit of our journey from an idea to be standing here almost 2 years later, and we did have some challenges to approach. Since we've been around for almost 20 years, we do have some legacy to take into account. Our service platform had been pieced together using different hardware and software components, the way many platforms are designed. The complex way of designing server platforms demands special competence, and we had to rely on a few people to be up and running. And that is very vulnerable to smaller companies Make It. And at the same time, the whole IT industry evolves rapidly, and IT is becoming more and more crucial to our customers and their core business every day. That increases the demands on us as a service provider, and we really had to keep up and also be ahead. So if we go back a year or two, we had for some time wanted to replace our aging and, as mentioned, complex solution with a new modern one. And as we sat down with the team responsible for putting the new solution together, the question came up about storage spaces direct in Windows Server 2016. And it did not feel good to invest time and money in an old technique, having a brand new around the corner. So we decided to go for it. And now we know the challenge, right? The solution, or perhaps the way to the solution, is to our challenge was co-working. And Make It has been a Microsoft partner since the beginning. For that, we are very proud. And building our new data center on anything but on a Microsoft platform was out of the question. And since we were seriously interested in Storage Spaces Direct, we turned to another partner, Fujitsu. And together with Fujitsu, we made a strategic alliance to develop a solution for Storage Spaces Direct since the pre-release of Windows Server 2016. And in co-creation, we successfully developed the Fujitsu solution, PrimeFlex for Storage Spaces Direct. And building the storage part of our platform was fairly easy, though, in comparison to what should come. Step by step, we created our solution, and as we went on, Fujitsu worked together with Microsoft to get the package pre-certified and pre-validated and fully supported. But since we were determined to take it one step further and also use software-defined networking in our new platform, our journey didn't end there. And sometimes it's pretty tough to be the one breaking the way, and there have been times when we really have questioned the chosen path. But since a couple of months, our new platform is up and running, and it's all software-defined. This solution enables us to offer a whole new kind of services to our customers and also opens up to new markets for us, a market that is not as bound to geography as we're used to. And we're using a lot of the new technique in Windows Server 2016, network controller, load balancers, and gateways, for instance. So, what are the benefits of this struggle? Well, our older platform were complex to keep running. Now we have one hardware and one software component, which simplifies its management. It also simplifies documentation and sharing the knowledge within our team. And of course, cost reduction. The solution reduces our cost for storage, reduces cost for floor space, power, cooling, etc. And we can grow as we go. We started out with a 4-node and can easily grow with this solution for many years. Another benefit is, of course, performance. And regarding performance, I really have to say that there's a huge difference between what we had and what we have today. About these numbers back here, those are IOPS, and we went from 30,000 IOPS in our old solution to 1.1 million. That's quite some difference. And we're also pleased that the latency have gone from milliseconds to nanoseconds. And by using the new technique, mirror accelerated parity, the solution also gives us greater storage efficiency. Since our journey with our platform, and especially the SDN part, took longer time than we first could predict, we took the opportunity to deploy PrimeFlex for Storage Spaces Direct to some of our customers before our own platform even was up and running. And I would have to say that we now have a unique experience of deploying this platform, and I thought that I should give an insight to what we have done for some of our customers. And first up is Itero Business Solution. They're one of the largest Microsoft Dynamics partners in Sweden, focused on Dynamics 365, BI, and NAV. They develop business processes for companies in the SMB sector, focused on vertical solutions in several sectors. And they needed to replace their old platform due to end of warranty, and not to mention that they hit the roof regarding their storage. And with their new solution, they went from 4 physical servers down to just 2. And the quote here is from the responsible there. They're very satisfied. And our second business case is Ludwig Svensson. They've been in business since 1887, which is worth mentioning. And they specialize in climate screens and interior textiles for public spaces. They operate in many parts of the world, and with a production 24/7, they demand a secure IT solution to rely on. And they came to us with an old SAN solution, needed to be replaced. High complexity with low performance. And this is now replaced with a 4-node PrimeFlex for storage spaces direct package. And they are now experiencing a high-performing, dependable solution supporting their business around the clock and around the globe. And their solution is managed by Make It consultants on-prem, and we can proclaim a modern, efficient, and reliable solution to meet their demands, to meet the demands of a progressive company. So let's just sum up briefly, talk about some conclusions. This project has been really, really interesting for us, developing this together with Fujitsu and Microsoft. The benefits are pretty clear, as shown earlier, but at the same time, the journey has been quite tough for a smaller company like Make It. The technology is still new, and making this happen has sometimes been really, really hard on us. But the question is, was it worth it? And I have to say, absolutely. This experience gives us a great platform and for our business, and also a head start in the competition. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Andreas. It was an awesome success story. Thanks for sharing. So next, I want to introduce Thomas Maurer, longtime MVP, and from IT NETX. And he's helping implement a huge deployment using HPE gear for one of their customers called HIAC Data. So yeah, let's welcome Thomas. Come on.
I hope the mic works. Perfect. Hello, everyone. You might already know me from some of my presentation. My name is Thomas Maurer. I work as a cloud architect for a company called IT NETX. And I have the opportunity to share something to you for the first time I was working on for the last year, when we started together working IT NETX and HIAC Data to build a new cloud infrastructure in Switzerland and also now starting into Europe. So we addressed some of the, or HIAC Data addressed some of the challenges we had in cloud overall, right? And most of that is networking. So I'm just quickly going through that case and showing you a little bit what's going on. So we built that, or HIAC Data built that huge private network all over Switzerland to connect customers, right? Customers can get a 1 to 10 gig to 100 gig links directly connected to the HIAC data centers, where we then run our clouds. And every connection, just in terms of scale, is 96 times 100 gigabit, right? Every connection we run out in fiber, it's that fast. And then we also have direct connections to Frankfurt, and we also peer with Microsoft for the Azure data centers in Amsterdam and things like that. The whole project, obviously, is also secure by design, right? So that's one of the big things. If you work in Switzerland and you have bank customers and health insurance customers and things like that, you always think about security. So we guarantee that if you have one of our connections and you don't want it, data never leaves the HIAC data network, right? So there's nothing going over the internet if you don't want it to. So we can really make sure that your data stays inside Switzerland or has a direct private link to that. We also scale very well. Again, I said we have 96 times 100 gigabit fiber links, so we do no overcommitment. So if a customer pays for 10 gigs, he really gets those 10 gigs and it's always available to him. And then we also guarantee a very, very low latency, right? So right now we guarantee, I think, 0.5 milliseconds latency on 80 kilometers into the data center and between everything which runs in the private network. So they came to us and they showed us the network strategy, right? And now they said, okay, IDnetics, now you have to help us build a cloud which delivers to that network, right? And I was a little bit, first of all, I was thinking, wow, okay, that's quite a network they have there. And so we are building an infrastructure as a service cloud focusing on enterprise or traditional enterprise workloads, like single instance VMs and things like that, which really high uptime, right? That's what we do. We run flash-only storage in terms of performance. That's the only way we can do it. And I will talk a little bit about that, obviously, in a second. Then we're using the full Microsoft SDN stack, right? From like networking, low software load balancing, and everything which offers in 2016. We're offering shielded virtual machines. We also use tools like credential guards and things like that to make the whole environment secure. Some fun fact, we're also using 100 gigabit network through the whole thing. So we have, each service has 2 100 gigabit ports. We cannot even leverage that right now because of the PCI Express Bus 3.0. But still, we decided to go with that. So even if one card fails or something, or one port fails, we can still do that. So again, we are running Windows Server 2016. We are running software-defined networking, software-defined storage, failover clustering, Hyper-V, and all that stuff. I'm not going through that again. We then have our hardware config. We call it the FV1 large config, which is basically nothing else than the TL380. We have 24 SSDs inside it, and again, 100 gigabit networking. So this is one rack. We call it the scale unit. With that configuration, that offers us 400 terabyte flash-only storage and a couple of like 5,000 vCores in that ratio, and almost 10 terabytes of memory for in one rack. This is a thing like we then scale up. We have different data centers. We also call it regions to make it simple for customers, and then we run multiples of those scale units inside the data center, right? So one scale unit, again, 16 hosts. So we run hyper-converged systems. One regions right now in the first wave, we are around 500 to 600 servers we are deploying. And here are some fun facts to that. So we're running over 32 storage spaces direct clusters with that size. It's over 13,000 SSDs, right? 20 petabytes of flash storage. And it's also like really nice to see like we have over 1,200, 100 gigabit ports in that data center construct in the first wave, right? And we're still looking forward to grow even larger. So you can imagine that this is also has quite an impact on performance, right? So we did some performance calculations, and we had when we started that project from a year ago, there was nothing like the certified program, right? And there was nothing really there yet. So we had to go through and do all the measurements by ourselves and thinking about it, what we were going to do. So we're pretty happy about the mixed random IOPS. So in this case, I think we have a ratio between write and read IOs. So we try to make it as real as possible. So we can run up to, I think, 3 million IOPS. By the way, we keep it way smaller per rack. So we do not overcommit, and we can burst out if we need to, but make it more stable, a stable experience. And you can also see we have really high throughput, obviously, if we go on and deploy that. And then you can also see, which is really important, if everyone dealt with storage problems in the room, like performance problems. So yeah, so you can see that like, when you dealt with that, latency is a huge impact, right? It's not only about IOPS and about throughput, but also latency, right? If the latency goes up, like every application just feels really bad. And that's a way we can deliver on. And that's possible through storage spaces direct. Now, as you can imagine, I told you that we went through a couple of steps, and in an environment like this, it's really important to do validation and testing to run that in production. So we have a development environment, an integration environment, and a production environment. So every time we get a new Windows build or a Windows Server build or get new drivers, new firmwares, and things like that, we have to go to that development design stage and then go to integrations where we then do long-term performance tests and also like reliability tests, right? And we compare the results with previous builds and things like that. And this is a lot of work. You cannot imagine how much work that is. So we are really looking forward, and we're working heavily with HP and Microsoft on that to switch to the software-defined program, because this will take all the pressure of testing away from us and give it to them, right? And we will have more time to invest on features like that. So again, software storage space direct was definitely the right choice. There's nothing which can perform like storage spaces out there. It was funny when I talked to one of my colleagues when we started the project. He came from another service provider, and they had this huge SAN infrastructure, and he was telling me that, yeah, do you think storage spaces can deliver on performance? And I was like, yeah, I think so, because we can now scale out with every rack a million IOPS, right, without a problem. So with more workloads, we get more IOPS and everything, so that works pretty smooth. And then, again, we're really looking forward to that program and going for these validated scenarios to save us a lot of time in terms of testing, right? So, yeah, if you have any questions on that one, feel free to connect to me. I have to run to another session right after this. But yeah, I'm here the whole week, so if you have any question on that project, on HIAC data or anything, feel free to contact me. So with that, I'm back to Zua.
Cool. Thanks, Thomas. I think that must be one of the largest Spaces Direct setup at least I'm aware of, so that's awesome. Cool, so guys, real quick, I think we have like 5-7 minutes. I do want to leave time for questions, but quickly in closing, I'll just leave you with this one slide. It shows you the list of partners, the benefits you get from the program, and also some resources to sort of learn more about. Do visit our booths, do visit partners' booths. They have done a lot of hard work to make this happen and be at a point where customers can actually trust these systems to run in their production environments and host so much data and so many IOPS, right? So that's truly amazing. And that's just within like a year or a year and a half that we actually introduced this. And plus, there's a bunch of resources to sort of go learn more about technology. All right, so with that, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming to this session. Please do evaluate this. We like getting feedback, and we want to improve every year onwards. So thank you again, and any questions, please feel free to ask or just approach me in front of the stage, and I'm happy to sort of just stick around for any questions that you may have. Thanks, everyone.